So we weren't recording just now, but Kurtis was telling me a joke, basically. It was a long explanation, but it did have a punchline. And at the end, Kurtis got close to his mic like this to relay the punchline of the joke. So what if that's how the future is going to be? We're all going to have headphones and our own little personal mic. How cool would it be so you can like emphasize certain things because like just by your choice of getting closer to a microphone?
And then you could sound really nonchalant and like you're not don't really care too much and you're not present in the conversation by stepping away from the mic like this. Like,
exactly.
I really don't care about what you're saying, but I'm going to tune in a little bit just to give my opinion and then I'm out.
I think that would be a great way to like, when you're in a conversation and the conversation really isn't going anywhere and you're like trying to get out of that conversation, how you relay that information is just to step back.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. All right. Okay.
No, but you don't understand. This person cut me off in Starbucks. You don't know.
Yeah. No. I'll see you.
Oh, right. Of course. No, I totally get it because you're relaying this information about.
I'm gonna leave.
And then, see, I think that would be great. This is the future. We are discovering the future in our podcast. Hello, everyone. My name is Jacob. I am one of your hosts.
I'm Kurtis. I'm the other one, I guess.
Yeah. We do a podcast
Is that how we open it? I forget.
Backyard Tabletop. Yeah, I think that's how we open it. We introduce ourselves and you have to think of something different every time.
How are you, Jake?
So, I'm doing pretty good. Sorry, I was taking a drink.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to ask you how you were.
I'm doing pretty good, man. It's Monday. I had a good day. Went to the bank. I bought some new sound equipment stuff. So that was pretty good.
Great.
Yeah, May's right around the corner.
Yeah.
I like May a lot. I think it's one of my favorite months.
It's the end of my birthday month.
It is. You did just have a birthday.
Yeah.
Well, a few weeks ago.
I just got one of my birthday presents today, and you're going to see it next time we play Curse of Strahd.
Oh. Is it a sword?
No. Why? What?
I don't know. Are you going to start getting real? It's like you die in game, you die in real life.
Okay, guys, we're done playing D&D. We're moving on to LARPing. It is the ultimate way to roleplay.
It is the superior game. No, so you just started building your own world. And this was something that you kind of always were like, no, that's really kind of like other people's
Literally
things.
2 episodes ago, I was like, I'm not creative enough to make my own world. I'll stick to the books.
Exactly. You stuck to, and honestly, you run the modules very well. From my experience and my opinion, you probably run the modules better than anyone else I've really watched because you run it pretty true to the book and you still put your fingerprint on them. Like the couple things that you've changed in Curse of Strahd were really cool. I thought anyway.
Because no matter what your table is, there's going to be people who enjoy different things. So I think it's important to understand what your table enjoys and stuff, and because every book is the same, and not everyone's going to enjoy it the same. So
exactly, and I think you do that, and you also do what's fun for you because this is something you want to enjoy too. Yeah. And I think you do that very well, but you've taken your first few steps. Man, I'm really getting into the radio thing at this time. I'm getting your first. Man, you're taking your first few steps.
These are your first steps. What am I referencing, Jake? What was that a reference to?
Lord of the Rings?
No. Star Wars. It's what Obi-Wan says to Rey when she has her vision.
When she has her vision and she hears all these Jedi. No, that was... I don't know.
I'm out. I'm leaving.
You should slam the door as like comedic effect.
I just made the joke that wrapped it around. I made a joke in reference to the joke we made in the beginning. And now I'm doing it again by getting really close to the microphone.
This is my punchline.
Sorry.
Where was I? Oh, yes. You've taken your first few steps into understanding a much larger world. And in this case, it's your world, Kurtis. You have started
world.
creating a world. And I kind of want to take it a different approach this time. We've kind of just mainly been doing our thoughts on the matter, but this time I want to interview you on your thoughts and your process and your inspiration of what kind of where this came from. Why two episodes ago you were like, no, that's not my thing. Now it's a thing.
I've never been interviewed before, Jake.
Yeah. Well, this is something we both can put on our resumes. I can be a professional interviewer and you can be a professional interviewed.
I'm sure that'll be helpful somehow. I'm sure
really
someone's looking for somebody who's really good at getting interviewed.
I think that could be a thing. One day a company is like, hey, we just need a good face.
Yep.
And you have a good face, Kurtis. So
Thanks, Jake.
you also have a good voice. So I think it's a good pair. Why don't you tell me a little bit about where this came from? Why you started making this world? What was kind of the inspiration of you going like, hey, you know what? I think this would be a really cool thing I'd like to try.
So the funny thing is it kind of came out of nowhere, and it's not like I sat there and was going, how can I make my world? I wasn't like sitting there going, think. It was just like, literally, I was driving in the car one day and heard a particular part of a game I was listening to and was like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if it was like this instead or something? Like I got like this little tiny burst of an inspiration and that like exploded. When a firework goes off and you can watch it go.
Exactly.
Like that little thought was the little, and then it was like, no, that's it. It was like, suddenly it was like, oh, but then that would mean this, and then that could mean this, and then I could incorporate this idea I've had a couple times, and then that would mean that these people would be like this. And it was like, whoa, suddenly it was like my brain was like going everywhere.
Yeah, okay.
And that's really how things work for me most of the time. It's like it takes a certain spark for me to like finally get the wheels turning. Like I've said before, I think that's where we kind of differ is you're like an idea guy. You just come up with stuff, and everyone has their inspirations and stuff.
Oh yeah,
obviously.
for sure.
But like for me, it's so much more like I always have felt like I'm the tester and improver, not the idea guy.
Gotcha.
You know what I mean? I'm quality control.
Yeah. One of us is the writer, the other one's the editor.
Yeah.
Basically.
Well, yeah, and that's why I think we work really well together.
Yeah.
And a lot of that's why we're such good friends, and we like make really fun things together and stuff, is because you are always coming up with these ideas, and then I can sit there and go, but what if it was a little bit like this?
But what if it was different? No,
yeah. But what if it wasn't that?
No, exactly. No, and I completely agree. And I think that's why you make really good characters too. You do kind of get these sparks, and then are like, I'm gonna have this character be a little bit more like this instead of like the idea that you got from.
Yeah, it just kind of started like that. It was just a random thought that kind of turned into a bunch of compounding ideas that I was like, okay, this could either be one of those moments where I sit here and go, all right, cool, I'll remember that for later, and then never think about it again, or I could take the initiative right now and really actually start working on this.
Yeah.
And so as soon as I got home, I literally walked in the door and told my wife, like, hold on, I can't do anything yet. I have to go write some stuff down because I got a bunch of inspiration in the car and I don't want to forget anything. And she was like, oh, okay. All right. Okay. And so I went online and found a Google Docs template someone had made for like world building. And it just has a bunch of these like questions and sections. It like parses everything out into like the world and then like geography, and then society and races and everything. It just like parses everything out into sections.
Gotcha.
And then subsections in those sections.
Oh, that's really cool. In fact, most of where I got these questions, what I use is I bought a book that's build. It's oh, I have it here. I have it open still because I was just reviewing it. That way I don't mess up the name. World building in 30 days. 30 days world building is what it is. And it basically just has a list of the structures to follow. So that's cool. You kind of found a file, and it just like you just put it in a file.
I literally found just this document someone made, and it's a little too in depth for where I am in my process right now, I think. So I'm just kind of filling out spaces that I see. I probably should have found one that was a little more basic because I'm literally just starting. But so that's why. Yeah, I just went and found that and started filling some stuff out, and basically just wrote kind of almost like a small paper on like my world and the geometry. And then immediately after that, because one of the biggest things I had in mind was the way the world was structured physically, like the continents and the way the world is, what size the actual like planet itself was one of the first things that came to me for some reason.
Yeah, you started with the big picture.
Yeah, and so I went and found this map building software. I can't remember the name of it. Do you remember it?
Ink something. I could look it up while you continue to explain.
It's Incarnate, but it's spelled INK, like ink, and then Incarnate. It made it super easy for me to just kind of drop that idea onto a map so that I can just kind of reference it later and change it. And yeah, so I mean that's really it. It was less like I want to make a homebrew world that I can run things in, and it was more just like I've had a few small ideas swimming around in my brain. Yeah. And then this one spark of inspiration just kind of sent it all flowing. And so I took the opportunity and actually just put it down on paper.
Putting it down. Yeah. And I think that's kind of half the battle oftentimes. We can have all the ideas in the world. I think that happens to me all the time. I have all these ideas, and I have notebooks literally everywhere. I have notebooks in probably every backpack that I own. And I've probably used only maybe 2 of them because I know in my head I need to write it down, but that's the step that I usually always fail to do.
Well, and personally, I don't know if it's just me or just because I actually am bad at writing. Like, I don't like writing physically on paper or pen. I actually feel like I retain and can reference things so much easier. It's much less of a hassle for me if I do it digitally. Yeah. So I just got my little notepad app on my phone, and I've been like filling it up recently with just any random thought that comes into my head about the world and how something might work. I'll just jot it down. Like the other day, I just for some reason, one of the first things that's come into my mind through all of this is like what the drug would be, like what the underworld drug is for the world, like the baseline. I don't know if it's a narcotic technically, but the drug that is prominent in the world. And so I just sat there and was like, this is one of those things that definitely, if I don't write that down, I'm going to lose it. And so I just typed it up real quick. And
do you think that sparked because in our game that one captain was on catnip? What in D&D is basically
could be actually, yeah, it could have been that, and just the way, because I was also thinking something about like, because I'm sure we'll get into this, but something about my world is like it's high technology based, but the technology is based on magic. Right. And one of the ways I was thinking of that is like crystals are basically batteries, right? Right. But then I was thinking like, what would happen if you powdered up one of those crystals and like laced stuff with it and consumed it? And because the crystal holds magical energy, what would that do to your body and your mind and stuff like that? And that's like what I started writing down was, and its name is Kriz, and it's just like, Like, yeah, it's just like a one drug fits all thing. Like you can powder it and lace it into stuff that you smoke. You can melt it and inject it. You can, like, it's crazy. Yeah.
This is the podcast where we talk about fictional drugs, not real drugs.
Fictional drugs, obviously. Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm, definitely.
Just, role play opportunities.
You can snort it.
Just any way imaginable. Oh man. Well, that's great. Before we get into that, I do want to kind of come back a little bit and let's talk about the genre and setting of your place and kind of what sparked that for you.
Yeah.
I know you mentioned you saw a picture, I think it was, when you mentioned this to me a few days ago. Was it basically that picture? And then you haven't mentioned it yet, so I'll kind of let you explain that whole thing, but you kind of want to go for a crystal punk setting or genre, I guess. I guess it'd be a setting. But so what's kind of sparked this? Because crystal punk, we're both, fans of like fantasy, but also steampunk, and also like cyberpunk is something we both really enjoy as well. But you want to go a crystal punk idea. So let's talk about that. First, for those who don't know, because it is relatively still a new term, do you want to explain what crystal punk is?
Personally, I'm actually not even too sure if it's like a widespread term or if
because I had never heard of it.
I've just been using it a lot because there's this Kickstarter that I backed. That's these people that made a setting book for 5e called Crystal Punk. And I've been using that as the term to mean what I envision as essentially sci-fi fantasy in a way, like, but the other way around. So it's more heavily fantasy. It's based in the realm of fantasy, but there's like a lot of heavy sci-fi influence in it, kind of a thing. And as far as I know, it's really hard to find references for that kind of stuff because it's not super popular. Most of the way that I see it done is like where it's backwards. Yeah. It's like that show you used to watch where it's like it's on Earth, but you wouldn't know it's on Earth because it's like
it's
a billion years in the future. And so everything has
Chronicles.
Everything has like reset, but now there's like elves and orcs, but those are just like mutations of the human genome kind of a thing. So it's like a weird mix of fantasy and sci-fi, but it's not like it basically is a fantasy world.
Fantasy. Yeah.
Right. There's no like guns or lasers or anything like that. Right. And like magic doesn't power technology or anything. It's just fantasy.
Yeah.
But it has a sci-fi background. This is kind of some kind of blend that I see it in a lot of RPG works, honestly. Like people that make their own worlds tend to do things like this a lot because I think it's a really interesting and like even Legend of Zelda, the new one that Breath of the Wild, is actually very similar to this, where it's like
I could
it's
see
a
that,
fantasy
for sure.
world, but then there's this like hyper futuristic technology that has like lasers and like robots and stuff, and it doesn't really feel like it fits, but somehow it melds really well.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that, but the origins of it are different. The origins feel much more like steampunk. Yeah. Which, the genre exemplifies that genre is like, what if it was like our normal world, but then this technology took off and became the only thing, right? Yeah. So that's like steampunk is like, it's Victorian era, but instead of continuing how our technology normally did, steam technology just went crazy. And took off. That's steampunk. And cyberpunk is like, what if it's our world, but like in the 90s, all of the crazy like technology that was happening right then took off, and so people started like body modifying with that kind of technology, and that's why everything in cyberpunk almost looks like retro and neon, is because it's like the technology from 80s, that era just took off, and that's all anyone knows. So this is almost more like, what if it's a fantasy world, right? But then the technology of using magic to power technological machines took off. Yeah. Like almost like cyberpunk or steampunk. And so, you'll find stuff like people that will replace their eye with a crystal that lets them see things differently, or they'll modify their arms to be crystal powered bionics, or they'll replace organs with things, or even the way Warforgeds work in my world is basically it's somebody who's gone the full 100 miles and has just completely replaced their entire self with crystal powered technological enhancements.
Yeah.
And so their whole body is just technology.
Yeah.
Powered by magic.
That's just a super cool idea. I'm not gonna lie. You also mentioned glowing tattoos, and I totally
like there was something else. That's something
Curtis.
else that this kind of popped in my head that same day I was talking about like the crystals and powdering them and stuff. Like, what if you used that in an ink and infused it into your arms, and suddenly your arms are able to absorb, or these tattoos are able to absorb and then redistribute this magical energy. Like, you could print a like a spell, like basically print a spell scroll on your arm in crystal, and then your somatic and material component is done, and all you have to do is let that energy loose.
Right.
And so the writings on your arms is kind like doing the scroll, is doing the spell work for you. So I was thinking like you could make like cantrips could just be tattoos, right?
Yeah.
Like stuff like that.
Super cool. No, and I love it. And it's not like that's a relatively new idea, but you've kind of made it a little bit really part of your world building rather than just an added on thing that's cool. And I think that's unique in my opinion.
Yeah, and that Crystal Punk book definitely kickstarted a lot of this lines of thought for me, I think. I think their feel is definitely way more into the straight up technology side of things. Like there's not as much fantasy left as I would like in my world, so that's why I'm kind of making it my own thing. I'm definitely going to be using a lot of their stuff for inspiration, absolutely, because it looks like an amazing book, and that's probably where I'm going to have to get a lot of my art, because this is such a different thing that not a lot of people make art that fits the feel that I'm looking for, you know?
And probably help you put certain rules or things in the world rules into a 5e context rather than having to make that up too.
I'll definitely be using it in any games I run in this thing, because I want there to be subclasses and races and things that make sense in a world that has all this stuff, and they're absolutely going to include that in that book. So
super cool. That kind of transitioned to the next part. So once you kind of had that setting, you started building the map out, as you had talked to it a little bit about. What was cool, and you can probably talk about that picture a little bit more now. You said that picture had like sections broken out from this world that had a core, and now it's kind of the continents are literally, instead of divided by oceans, they're divided by air.
Yeah.
Super cool idea. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? And
let me find that picture real quick, because if we do talk about it, I want to talk about where it came from, because I don't want to just rip it off.
Oh, just rip it off. Yeah. That's a great idea.
This I'm assuming the artist is the same guy who made the thing, but it's a web comic, and I think he actually released an actual book, a print of it as well, called Skyheart. But it is his world is called Airth, as in AIRTH instead of Earth. It's Airth.
Oh, okay.
Which is really interesting. But basically, it was a picture I found where he basically made a diagram of how the world is formed. And it just like struck me with tons of inspiration and like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. I've never thought of something like that. The continents and the land is floating, separately from anything. So like any earth or land is, floating in the air and almost orbiting around a separate cloud layer that's underneath the earth. And
visually, I was just thinking of like Cloud City from Star Wars.
Yeah,
something
almost
similar to that,
but
kind of has this cloud.
But like where Cloud City is like it's a gas giant, right? That's what Cloud City is, where they just built cities that orbit it so that they can mine the gas or whatever. This is literally there is land on this world, but for some reason it just floats.
It floats.
Like nobody really knows why. Like people have made theories and stuff like that, but no one can really understand it. And so I kind of took parts of that idea and just kind of stuck my twist on it and changed things like that. But the visual of seeing the continents just floating with all these little tiny islands of Earth kind of in between them, just kind of kickstarted that thought for me. And so, in my world, it's all of these continents float and they're separate, but the actual planet itself is like kind of, it's somewhere between like Venus and Earth sized. It's smaller than Earth. Mm-hmm. So the continents are pretty small. Like you could get all the way from one side to the other of the continent in, a couple weeks time of travel. If that, maybe less. And then, under these, there's like rivers that flow, or at least off of one of the continents, there's rivers that start in the mountains at the center and flow all the way out to the sides, and then they just run off the sides. And then underneath,
so cool visually,
underneath all these continents, and they're thick too. They're thick almost as like the actual crust of Earth is, without getting down to the crazy depths of like hot rock and all that kind of stuff. Right. But like a mile or two thick. Underneath all of those, a few miles under them, is this layer of clouds that nobody knows what's under it. Like every once in a while there will be breaks and people will see water down there, way, 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 way down, like way below the clouds. Mm-hmm. But they've never seen any land underneath. And anytime anyone has ever tried to use some sort of flying or a spell or anything like that to traverse through the cloud layer, they are never seen again, ever.
It's
so
cool.
Nobody has ever discovered what's under there. Underwear? I'm 6. But like his whole thing is, he goes much more in depth about like he has like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 separate sections here where it's like there's the high islands that are like above the main continents that float, and then there's the main continents, and then there's the lower islands, and then there's the cloud layer, and then there's like the ocean, and then even below the ocean there's like cave systems under that.
Gotcha.
Mine isn't quite like that. I have a lot of differences in the layers and like what might be under the water or between the water and the clouds, or what's in the the core of the planet or anything like that. But I just kind of saw it and it just gave me a baseline to work from. Mm-hmm. So I really liked it.
No, I love that. And you kind of simplified it a little bit, and then I like that you kind of get into like the science of it, I guess you could say, because that's something that I know you're quite passionate about. You love science and understanding things in that way. So I can totally see you just seeing that picture and like, okay, this is kind of how it would work, and then just kind of running with it from there. I love that. So when you kind of had that idea of a planet and then the continents kind of separated, mm-hmm. The landscapes on each continent and like natural resources, and then you got kind of already mentioned this whole magic system of this crystal. What kind of made you start doing that when you kind of broke the continents? I know you mentioned that in a separate conversation when you showed me your map, which kind of like the theory that at one time Earth, the land was all connected. You kind of had that idea with your world on a smaller scale. But
so my thing that I kind of envisioned is that if you really went way back out and looked at it, and if all of these continents stopped floating and came together, it would almost form a perfect spherical shell around whatever this ocean or core or whatever it is. And you can see like the fracture lines in the continents and how they might fit together like puzzle pieces, and even all the little fractions of mini islands that are out floating by themselves would fit into place, you know. And if you actually did that, it would almost make like one coherent large mass that would actually probably be like a really beautiful arid place, because you'd have the mountains over here, and obviously it would be way smaller than, but it would almost make like an Americas type of thing. You know how we have the huge gamut of every biome almost in North America and South America. Like we've got huge mountains, we've got swamps, we've got deserts, we've got the highest of the highs, the lowest of the lows. You know, that's kind of the whole thing with the Americas. And if you shrunk all this down, it would basically be about the size of both of the Americas, like at least square footage wise, you know? And it would make like this really beautiful biome. But since these pieces were separated, the second largest continent is literally just desert. There is no discernible water on the surface.
Well, first, so how many continents are there exactly that you have thus far?
Actual large continents that have like societies and things on them. I have there's the main continent, there's the desert continent. So that's 1, 2, there's the 2 poles. So 4, 5, 6. I think there's 6 actual main continents that have formed societies and people living on them, like as large places. All those little islands in between, speckled in between, they have some things like a lot of them are used as like pit stops and places to stay when you're traveling between continents and things like that. People have taken them to be that. And because at one point, the only way to travel between continents was to either get a wizard or somebody who could teleport you, or get someone who was well enough in magic that could like cast fly on you, and then that only lasts a certain amount of time, right? So if you're a wizard who can't teleport but you can fly, you need places to rest, right? And so that was the thing, is like there were all these old routes that the wizards would use to pass between continents that are like, or sorcerers, I guess, that are like really these little islands. And so all of them have these places that were at one point set up because they were waypoints. These people had to rest in order to get across that huge expanse, which was not normal either. Like people up until a few years ago, for reasons I'm sure we'll get into, no one went to other continents. You were on the place you were, and you couldn't get across unless you could fly. It's really interesting.
That's brilliant. And you also need, some places that are dangerous and mysterious for your people to explore.
Exactly.
And little islands like that make perfect little places to explore. So you have the continents, and you kind of talked about one's a big desert. One was kind of like a farmland type place, right? So I guess you have 3 main ones.
So
right?
four
main ones.
The largest main continent is literally like D&D baseline fantasy. Lots of greens, there's forests, that's where all the rivers are, there's lakes, there's a big mountain range, there's a few settlements where most of them are like farmland. This is like the verdant, green, everything grows continent. So that's where a lot of the food resources for the world come from and things like that. That's where all the exports are and things like that. And there's a large main city there too that, is basically the main place for the average folk in the world. And then there's the desert place, which it does have people living on it, but no one really knows except those people how they're living there, because as far as most other people can tell, there's no water. These people are nomadic. There are no cities. They just travel across the dunes and live there. Like I'm not gonna lie, that whole continent is very, very heavily like influenced by literally the book Dune. Just because I love that book so much. And then there's there's another green continent, but it's very small, and it's in my mind, it's almost like a secluded, almost like monastic type of place, kind of influenced by East Asian culture and some South Asian culture and things like that. In my mind, I haven't really thought too much about that one yet. It's been the most recent addition.
Okay.
And then all the way on the bottom right of the map is a continent it almost seems kind of like Australia to me, like it's kind of over there by itself, kind of small. It's about maybe a quarter of the size of the main continent, but it is edge to edge city.
That's the place.
That is where all of the technology, all of the crystal punk, like that is the crystal punk city. That is where technology is. That's where Warforged come from. And they are the city who invents most of the technology and stuff. And they're the first people who literally only maybe a dozen, maybe less years ago when we start, I don't know what it'll be, invented flying machines, flying ships. And that is literally when people started actually being able to visit other continents, like the average person could visit other continents and see the world. And so on the main continent, like the fantasy continent, you're starting to see that technology sort of start to spread a bit from the main city that's got like a main port in it.
Right.
Yeah. So, and again, I really don't have names for most of these yet either.
Yeah. You've quite literally have just done this in like what, the past 2 weeks? Like,
yeah, because cyberpunk usually is pretty campy, like with how they name things.
Yeah.
My actual first idea for the naming of that whole city continent would be literally the city of Crystal.
That's kind of cool.
I really like that. Because it's all crystal. Crystal.
Yeah.
I just think it fits.
Just a little bit of
and it makes sense because in cyberpunk, literally there's stuff that's like, it's like Night City. It's literally called Night City in cyberpunk.
Yeah.
Cyberpunk 2077. It's called Night City, and it's just because like it's all nightlife,
all night. Yeah.
Yeah. Like it's funny to me, and so I was like,
well, and I mean that's
naming conventions like that are pretty.
Yeah, normal. Exactly. And you know, you can look at our history. Humans aren't incredible at naming things either, right? It's like
so true.
We've like Earth, I believe, is what, dirt in like Latin or something like that.
Like we call Earth because it's made of earth.
Yeah, it's like we're not incredible, and it's like I feel like that's such a trope with a lot of like early writers. Like I have to think of this name that no one else has ever heard of, and it has to have all this history. And it's like, no, you should name it Red Rock because there's red rocks that they mine here,
like most towns were either named named after the person who found them or named after the first thing somebody saw when they made that city.
Exactly.
Like,
or we name it after a person or something like that.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
So it would totally work. I like it.
Yeah.
So now that you've kind of gotten your world, your genre, your continent, your map, have you thought much about law and order and government?
I really honestly haven't thought about like a lot of the social structures yet. I mean, obviously the continents I think will have individual governments. The main continent probably is a kingdom of some sort, where that main city that's kind of the main port on that fantasy continent is like where the kingdom is and where the king is and stuff like that. The city might be more of a republic where it's like more of a presidential type thing and stuff like that. Or it might be even more like cyberpunk where it's basically like the city is ruled by the corporations kind of a thing. I think that would be really interesting. That's a pretty common punk trope. Yeah. I mean, I really haven't thought of a lot of the social structures yet, other than just kind of the baseline. And the two poles are actually really, really large continents, but there's no civilization on either of them because they're just not habitable.
Great places to explore.
Yeah, great places to explore. Yeah.
No. Well, cool. I know you'll get there eventually, but it sounds like you're kind of already coming up with ideas that might work.
Yeah. I mean, I have all sorts of little thoughts, but I haven't really put many of them to paper yet.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, so have you thought anything about class divides or kind of the dangers in each of these lands? Because I know, Dungeons and Dragons is huge on the races, right? The species, all different types of species of humanoid, which we should talk about one of these days, that we think the races should be called species and not races.
Yes, it bugs me so much that they call them races. They're not races. They're different species entirely.
Yeah. They're humanoid, but they're different.
And that's what, yeah. Well, no,
but anyway,
we won't get into that.
We'll get into that at a later date.
I feel like I really haven't thought a whole lot about like how the origins of the different, like origins of elves, origins of humans, origins of dwarves, or even whether I want there to be dwarves or elves or whatever. I haven't thought a lot about those origins and stuff yet. I know right now, basically the whole world has turned into like a big mixing pot. There's hardly any cities or towns where you will find only one main race like living.
Yeah.
There might be places that were founded by dwarves or something, so there's a big dwarf presence, but there's not going to be like one town that you find where it's just all humans and everyone looks at you weird if you're an elf.
Gotcha.
Especially the main large city.
Mm-hmm.
And this might go into a little bit about like the origins of the planet and like how were there mixed things here if nobody could travel between the continents except by magic up until this point. Like, how would there be elves, dwarves, and humans on that city place if we thought all the elves, dwarves, and humans started on this continent? Like, how would that kind of thing work? I'm definitely going to have to go more into like this is the weird thing to me is you said I started with the more like macro view, but I feel like I've started in like the middle. A lot of people say you should either start with the micro view and like make one city and then build out from there, kind of a thing, like kind of like you did.
Exactly.
But and then the other group of people will say you should start with creation. How did your world start? Then think about the gods, and then the cosmos, and then your planet, and then the origins of all the races on your planet and all that. Like you start at the beginning for everything and then move inward. And I've kind of started in the middle where I'm like, I don't really know that much about like deities or origins of races or anything, but I also don't know a lot about like the individual cities or whatever. So it's just kind of, I don't really know a lot of that stuff yet. Well, I have a few ideas, and I have a pretty definite idea for like the origin of the world, and how that might work. And I know that I want to keep the pantheon pretty small. Yeah. I feel like D&D 5e especially has way too many to keep track of. You know, and I know why they do it because the way that deities work in D&D, that's how it has to be. Yeah. But yeah, so I'm still kind of figuring all of the origins and stuff out. Gotcha. Sure.
No, I love that. And I mean, it's even kind of fun. It's like, even if you don't come up with an answer, that's still kind of a cool thing to just have. Like, no one really knows how elves got over to this continent. It's
and that's the thing. Even if I figure it out someday, it's probably not going to be common knowledge to pretty much anyone. Like, there's already a lot of things I know that even right now I don't necessarily want to talk about a lot, like in your presence. Tell me because there'll be like big mysteries in the world. Yeah, like why do the continents float? And it's like I can tell you why people think they float, but I'm not going to tell you why they actually float. No, I totally people might be right, they might be wrong, but.
And you got to cherish when you create something. You got to cherish the secrets.
That's the hardest thing for me.
It's the hardest.
I want so bad to just tell you everything that I come up with when I come up with it.
Yes, and I'm slowly learning the lesson. I watching Critical Role, and see how Matt, when people like, so what's the reason for this? And he's like, you don't know. And just that grin that he gets, that's just like, you don't know, but I do. And I'm just like, that's what I need. I need to relish the secrets.
Yeah.
Because I think it's just fun.
Yeah, I mean, there's other stuff like that. Like this planet doesn't have moons; it has rings.
That was another thing.
And those rings are how people keep track of things, and they're what controls. There's not really any oceans, but there's lakes, and the rings kind of have an effect on the gravity and the tides with that and stuff. And there's one large sun that it revolves around, and all that kind of thing. It's just there's a lot of that stuff that I can tell you what it looks like and things like that, but I don't want to tell you about how it got there because that's part of the fun. You know?
That's totally cool. At least you mentioned it because that's just a lot of this just seems really cool visually.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, if a dream ever were to come true and you get to like ultimately maybe create a book for this, or just get dumped a lot of money in your pocket and you're able to like, I want to do this and hire a bunch of artists. That would just be super cool. I mean, just what you've described is cool.
My favorite thing is that I'm finally getting to use all of the like tropes and thoughts and things that I've had for visuals and stuff that I love and put it into something that other people have told me like, whoa, that's really cool. And I'm like, it is. Okay. Cool. I'm glad it is. All right, great. Glad it's not just me.
You validated it. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Well, so let's get into the technology of this world. That's kind of what sparked this a little bit. The specific question I have here is like, what's the danger between like traveling from continent to continent? Do you have any sort of ideas and the technology that comes with that? And then D&D is known for its monsters. So do you have any sort of idea what might be like the enemies of sorts in this world?
I'll answer that question after a short break.
Do you have to use you have to use the restroom or something?
I gotta pee.
Okay, that's fine. This would be a great time to put a sponsor. Man. This episode of The Backyard Tabletop is brought to you by water. Stay hydrated, friends. It really is just good for you. Make sure you're drinking water. Okay, back to the show.
I gotta say, I love the way you like looked at me when I said that because you were like, is he doing a bit?
Yeah, I seriously thought it was a bit. I was like, I literally thought you were saying that because you just wanted a second to think about the question. That's what I thought it was.
No, sorry.
No, you're fine.
Man, that cold brew goes right through you.
It does. So with all of that said, thus far into this podcast, if you made it this far into the podcast, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Because we're probably like 45, 50 minutes into this, and just thank you for listening. So let's talk a little bit about the technology in this world. You've mentioned it on several occasions already. You can talk specifically. What I have written here is like the technology traveling between the worlds. You mentioned it, or not the worlds, between the continents.
Yeah.
And are there any dangers that come with that? And then that would lead into D&D has monsters. So what are the threats in your world, Kurtis, that you have thought of? Are you going with like the classic D&D tropes and maybe put your own twists on the visuals of them and stuff like that? Or do you have anything new you might want to add? And maybe that Kickstarter has a bunch of new monsters that you'll be able to pull from as well.
I think for sure it'll give me a lot of good ideas of things that will fit kind of the feel I'm looking for. So we'll go over technology and stuff first. Basically, my idea is this, and I have no issue talking about this because I think if I start a thing in this is basically going to be like the part of the paragraph that I tell all the players just so they understand how the world works.
Yeah.
Essentially, magic in this world. In D&D, it's referred to as the weave, right? Mm-hmm. Kind of how magic works in its own kind of dimension and is spread out and is accessible. In this world, it's almost more like a magnetic field that is being that is almost like in our world where our core creates a magnetic field. People in this world have come to understand and recognize that the core of the world, even though no one's ever been there, it is radiating a field of magic that is referred to as...
He just did air quotes, everybody.
Yeah, air quotes. That a lot that, the more scholarly people like wizards or the scientists or artificers would call basically the source.
Yeah.
And
that's really funny because I named something in my world called Source that you guys will get to in the upcoming campaign.
Well, you know what else is really funny about that? Remember when I was in my game class and we kind of came up with an idea for a video game together?
Yes.
Magic in that world was called Source.
That's right. I totally forgot about that.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So I'm kind of calling back to that.
That's awesome.
But this radiation, this magnetic magic field is called the Source. And they recognized that there were these crystals that kind of naturally occur in the earth of the continents that they've been able to mine and find, and even in some cases, make artificially, that can almost absorb and hold energy from this field like a battery kind of a thing. And then they can redistribute that energy in certain ways, such as literally just energy, like electricity, or
like you mentioned, the battery.
Or it can be used to fuel magical abilities or weapons or things like that. And so basically, people have taken this, and it's almost like if our world had, like the core of our planet had a radiating wireless electricity source. We would probably come up with technology that could pull that out of the air and harness it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if you think about that, it's almost like free energy kind of a thing. And so it's like
it's free energy.
Right. As long as you have the crystal to harness it, you can do just about anything with it. It's almost limitless.
Interesting.
And so that's my idea that this radiating source basically fuels just about everything, all of the technology that is made, and that comes in a lot of different ways. Just like in cyberpunk or steampunk, it can be body modification, it can be vehicles, it can be even just normal, just house appliances and things like that. Yeah. Like in the city, that
like lights and stuff.
That main Crystal city, it literally looks like a city. Like it's all bright neon, and the crystals are all different colors depending on what they do. Like I always imagine more of a pinkish hue.
Yeah.
But there's like blue ones and green ones and purple ones, and they all do different things, and they're different sizes.
That classic.
And
trope,
so it gives that kind of neon look to the whole city where the power that's being utilized takes on different characteristics depending on how it's being used. And so, there's cars and they can fly, and people walk around with a crystal in their eye socket, or like I said before, or there's warforged that walk on the street. My thing in this city, this main city of Crystal, is that their entire, I'll say police force, but guard is entirely made up of warforged that were purpose built for being the city guard. And so those aren't necessarily made as a human that turned into a warforged. They were completely artificially created.
So
they still have minds and things like that. They still have a sense of agency.
You could have a really fun little debate as well on like Warforged and humanity and stuff like that. Classic Blade Runner stuff.
Yeah, for sure. That's a major trope of these types of things.
Yeah, I love it.
I love that thing. One of my favorite characters in my favorite video game of all time, Mass Effect, is the Geth that you pick up along the way. His name is Legion, and like his entire thing is he comes from a race of AIs where each individual body is just electronics, but what inhabits it is AI programs.
Yeah.
And the greater the number of programs there are, the smarter it gets, because they can do processes faster and faster and faster. And so his whole thing is like, do I have a soul? Am I real? Or am I just an AI? Like, that's his whole story arc in the game. And I love that arc. It's so good.
It's so good. And I mean, that's why I love Blade Runner so much. You know, the latest one really kind of grapples with stuff like that. Like, what makes you a human, right? It's like, what is this thing that we call humanity? And it's a fun thing to just explore and think about. So yeah, I could totally see that be a classic fun punk trope.
Speaking of like technology and we'll move into getting across the places, there's these sky ships. And I think it'll be less of like a Treasure Planet thing where they're not like, they don't look like ships, because there's never been a need for boats in this world, except for small ones that can be on lakes and rivers. So there are no ships that had sails and rigging and all of that kind of stuff. So whereas that one was kind of the other way around, where you can see that these people traveled the cosmos because at one point they had boats, and then we're like, well, we also need to get across that ocean, the sky ocean, so we'll make a boat that can do that, but it's still just a boat. This will be kind of the other way around, where it's like they've never needed a boat for anything. They've never needed vehicles, hardly ever, because the continents are so small that you can go somewhere on foot in a week or two. They don't need vehicles. And so I still have to come up with the shape it's going to be, but it would totally be nothing like we've really seen, because the inspiration for it is just going to be like maybe it'll be like an actual, like almost Da Vinci style, like winged machine that flies across, because the only reference they have for flying is birds.
Right.
You know?
That's a very interesting
And that's the only
point.
way they can get across.
I love that.
So yeah.
Oh, that's going to be fun inspiration, my dude.
So there's a lot of dangers that come with that, because what they've kind of discovered, what the smarter people have kind of discovered, is that the continents are almost in a weird precarious balance between the gravity that is pulling them towards the core and some kind of weird force that they think might be connected to the source but cannot prove it, is also pushing them away from the thing, almost like opposite ends of a magnet.
Yeah.
Kind of like how you can make something float if you put a magnet under it and have a magnet on it. It will, if the opposite ends of the magnet are facing each other, it will overcome the force of gravity and stay floating there.
Yeah.
Right? It's almost similar to that.
Yeah.
But they don't really know why. But basically, as soon as you get below or too far under the threshold of where the continents sit and float, gravity instantly becomes stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger the closer you get to the core. It's very easy to, if you're not paying attention and you're not sticking to your right altitude, to start getting pulled that direction. And that's why no one has ever come back from trying to explore below the clouds, because they can't reach escape velocity from the incredibly powerful gravity that starts pulling them down from there.
Oh man, that just gets my mind like going on like fun like legends and tales of like what's down there.
And you got to think, like, if it's survivable down there, there's probably at least a good few hundred people who have tried to do that and never come back, and maybe they've got like some kind of civilization down there because like, they just never could make it out, you know, almost like being on a stranded island kind of a thing. You could go,
my mind's already going
in different directions.
Yeah, that's so fun.
But you know, there's also there's a lot of I think that in a world that is floating and has air between, you know, how we have so many creatures in our oceans that are bizarre and weird and crazy because we've never explored down there. In the last 10 years, people have gotten the ability to explore between these islands. who knows what the heck is in those spaces, except instead of all evolving to swim and breathe water, they've all evolved to fly. And overcome the forces of gravity that will pull on them if they're too high or too low, you know.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So I've got a lot of ideas for, you know, swapping around some animals to be more winged and more towards the skies, and even changing some D&D monsters to where just giving them natural fly speeds, because it's the thing. Like instead of having oceans with millions of different types of creatures in them, they have skies with millions of different types of creatures.
That is a really cool. I didn't even register that. So basically, your skies are your oceans.
Yeah, the sky is the ocean. Yep.
That is weirdly beautiful, because I'm like imagining, like, you know, like what normal people would be like sitting at a beach looking at the ocean. There's places where you can just look out onto just basically sky and see there's probably crazy creatures
quote
out there.
Unquote shorelines or beaches at the edges of these continents that people will sit and stargaze, because there's no clouds above, like hardly any clouds at least, above you to block the stars, and you can see, you know, flying manta rays in their schools and sky whales.
It's
and
basically Knights of the Old Republic when you're on Dantooine and there's just that stingray,
that manta ray that's just floating.
Oh man,
yeah,
that's just like bird watching to the 10th degree. Like that's a really cool idea. I love that. You're gonna have some fun.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Gotcha.
And then, you know, there's also still going to be caverns and mountains and caves and things like that, because these continents are thick. Like there's room for caves under the ground,
underneath and stuff.
And yeah, even if you go out and around and under, there might be creatures that live on the bottoms of these continents too.
Interesting.
That nobody ever really sees. Yeah, all sorts of interesting things.
Dang, that's going to be cool, man. Yeah. Well, the last question I have here, how would you go about destroying your world? And what do I mean by that? Well, what are your future ideas for campaigns?
Oh, okay. I was like, I really want to take the typical approach of like starting off small.
Yeah.
I think what I really want to do is, yeah, you guys can have your certain origins or whatever. I would love it if you all were from the same small town on this fantasy island, the main continent.
Okay.
And you guys are from maybe one of the larger cities, but like you've never seen the main city. You've never seen Crystal. Like you guys are like bumpkins who barely even now are starting to get crystal power in your homes, like, because it's spreading that slowly over the continent. You know, so like if the continent's a big rectangle, on the bottom right is the main kingdom of the fantasy continent, right? And it is where the main docks are that the city of Crystal has made landing and does imports and exports and all that kind of stuff. But if you go all the way to the top left of the continent, even though it's a small continent, there's still people out there who are like, no, crystal energy's the devil. We don't use it. It's an imbalance of nature. It's going to make the continents fall out of the sky. Like, you're not meant to travel across the expanse. Like, don't worry about that. Like, never let it get to us. And, you know, there might be one or two people who are starting to see the usefulness of it. And, you know, my plan is for literally there's going to be like cell phones, but they're essentially just a small rectangle of semi-transparent crystal. Yeah. That just has very specific things that it's used for, like communication or news bulletins or things like that. You know,
oh, that's going to be so much fun.
And people even get them built into their hands or weird things like that. And, you know, like those little bits of the technology are just starting to creep in. And so maybe all of you guys are starting to make your way to the continent. And so you might run into a few things on the way there. And then once you get to the main city, my plan is for there to be some sort of disruption. Like, you guys want to go to Cristal, but they've closed the docks because there's some sort of disruption in the city, and you guys will have to help solve that. And then, so gotcha. I slowly want to expand the world in front of you guys.
I really like that idea, because then it's less like having to explain to someone what the city's like, and then having to explain to someone what the fantasy world is like, or the continent. Now it's like you just explain what this is, and then you, as the dungeon master, as the narrator, get to go about introducing it to the players, and everyone gets to experience it at the same time. Right. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, and so instead of needing to have someone that acts as, like in a story, you would have someone who knows nothing about what's going on, and they act as the audience proxy, in Harry Potter. Harry Potter is a wizard, but he's never experienced the world of wizardry, and so you discover it through his eyes, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. All of you would be in the same boat. Some of you might be a little more into the technology than others. Some of you might come from a very strict parentage, and you're a cleric or whatever, and so you don't use the technology ever because it's against your religion or blah, 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 blah.
Right.
And so you would all get these things thrown at you at the same time, and you'd be able to come to understand them together. And I think that's what I want to do for, at least the first campaign, to get everyone on the same page about the world, so you can all understand it together. And then, if we do one-shots or secondary campaign or whatever like that, you can start wherever, because then you know about the world.
Then you know about it.
And we might not even explore every continent in the campaign. I have a lot of big ideas for, like, the big bad and what the huge main overarching threat is going to be. But what I really want to do is I want that to be the secondary thing. I want the huge main overarching threat to always kind of loom over you guys.
Okay.
But I want to make it player driven.
Yeah.
I want to work individually with the people and help you build your backstory and incorporate it into the world, and then take that and make it a story beat and build it into the story, so that it'll be a quest at some point,
Exactly.
That'll be something that you guys will have to resolve, because if you're working together, it's going to need to be something that you can do.
Yeah.
And I just really, I think it's so much more fun for the players when they have a say in what is happening in the story, or at least a reason other than I'm an adventurer and I like to go on adventures.
I like to do things,
to be incorporated into this adventure.
Something I've also experienced is that, like, I could be writing all day and world building all day, but it really doesn't feel like it's real until the players
interact with it.
It's like the players are the lifeblood to the world at that point. And even bring up stuff that I never even really considered. And I'm like, oh yeah, let's use this. And now I can take that idea and write something about it.
And part of me wants to leave parts vague in my world building. I don't want to know exactly how many people live in this city, exactly who every single person is, what every shop does, what every shop owns. I want to leave some of those details vague, so that it leaves room for the role play and the coming up with things on the spot, because I don't want it to just feel like my world that I'm letting you guys play around in.
Yeah.
I want it to feel like a world that you guys have had an influence on and can enjoy and be a part of. Because if all I do is say, this is what's in my world, you are now there, what do you do? I can say, this is what I've started with, what do you want to play?
Yeah.
Who do you want to be, and what effect do you want to have on the world? Just like you let me in your game basically create a town.
Yeah.
Because my story revolved around the town's founding and destruction and things like that, you put that thing on the map because I wanted it there.
And it was really cool. And I love it. And then
I want to leave it open enough for that kind of stuff to be doable.
That's really cool. I think that's brilliant. And there's often things that I like to keep in my head. I don't like to write down for that reason, because improv is just a huge part of this game. And being able to improv a moment and run with it at the table, and then like, okay, take that note. Later, I'm going to talk about this.
And I think the nicest thing about building your own world is you have the capability to change those things at the drop of a hat.
Exactly.
You know, I can maybe have all these ideas about how this particular technology works and things like that, or what this city's going to look like. But if one of the players comes to me and says, hey, this is a character I want to play. This is a character I want to build and do, and this is what I want their story to look like. I'm going to go, okay, here's how we can make that work. And I'll start changing things. Like, I think the main thing with any game I want to play in this world is, at least the main one that we do in this world, I want to work very, very closely with every player, discover the story that they want to tell with their character and the background that they want to have with their character, and make sure that it is entirely and completely coherently melded into the world.
Yeah.
Because then it feels so much more authentic.
It's so rewarding too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that is a great place to leave off this podcast, Kurtis. I hope you enjoyed the interview. That was a great conversation.
Yeah, it was great.
Did I do a good job?
Yeah, you did a great job.
Yeah.
I felt very welcome.
Okay. Well, thank you.
And I felt even more authenticated because you brought up stuff that I had barely mentioned in the past, and were like, when we talked about this before, this was something you mentioned. Can you expound on that? I'm like, aw, he listened.
Well, but of course, Kurtis. But of course. Thank you, everyone, for listening to the Backyard Tabletop Podcast. My name, as always, pretty much since I was born, is Jacob.
And my name, for at least the past 10 minutes, has been Kurtis.
You all take care. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.